Hey everyone, welcome to the Engage and Equip podcast, a resource designed to build substantive disciples for the local church. I'm here with Dr. Bill Hefner, with Monty Knutter, chair of our elder board, and our resident classicist, and Jill Reese, who has a master's in social work as our resident counselor. And I'm Nick Gibson. I'm the senior pastor here at High Point and one of our theologians. Okay, so we're going to jump into some of these questions still related to intoxicating substances. We're going to focus in the first part of our episode on leftover questions about substances in particular. And then there's a few leftover questions about wine and its relationship to people's addictions relative to communion at the end. So we're going to jump right in with some questions. And a couple of these questions are related to GLP-1s, which are like Ozempic, sort of like drugs that affect our capacity for hunger and so on. And I think the reason we've talked about GLP-1s in this series is not because they create a completely altered state of consciousness, but they do change how hunger and our bodily desires enter our physical consciousness. And also they can be used as ways of avoiding other things in our life, which drugs are often used for. So we've been talking about these as part of the intoxicating substances, though they're not the same kind of intoxicant as some others are. But they're a big deal right now and people have questions. So Bill, we're going to throw this to you first since you're the medical doctor, and then we'll chime in to the extent to which it's relevant to the rest of us. Somebody asked, my doctor wants to start me on GLP-1s. Is that unbiblical as a cheat on living a disciplined life? Should I be able to beat my body and make it my slave rather than to do a weekly jab to control my weight?
Well, I'm going to say no, it's not a cheat at the very outset. I know we have a tremendous problem of obesity in this country. It's felt that maybe up to 70% of us as Americans have some issue with weight. And it's truly creating a medical crisis for chronic disease and early death. And the GLP-1 agonists were originally developed to treat type 2 diabetes primarily because of the fact that so many people who struggle with that disease are overweight. And therefore that creates insulin resistance, and then they can't control their blood sugar correctly. So it was a great finding and a great discovery for that, and it is now considered first line for treating type 2 diabetes with all the other effects it has to with both heart disease prevention and even now kidney sort of protection for diabetics. So with that as a sort of a background, now, of course, because of its effects in the satiety center in our brain, gastric emptying, or if you will, stomach emptying, is limited by these drugs, and by the fact that it also stimulates the pancreas to produce more of a hormone that can lower blood sugar. It has some really good effects. So my thinking with this is that if a person sees that they have a problem with obesity, that's at least the first step. And therefore, I would hope at that point they would be amenable to not only the GLP-1 agonist, but also change in their lifestyle. Now, that being said, the drug itself is decreasing appetite, and it is thereby reducing caloric intake and promoting weight loss. Once that drug is stopped, all of that hunger and all of that desire for food just comes right back. And it's been shown very well that when people stop these drugs, generally for various reasons, side effects, about 30% have pretty significant side effects. Cost is another issue. But when they discontinue them, most people, again, up to about 70% of people will regain most of their weight within 1 year. So if those lifestyle changes are not discussed, and the underlying, if you will, emotional, mental, and even spiritual reasons for obesity, what is the love affair that you have with food? What is the mental block for physical activity, in your life? What is it that you are trying to feel better about by eating? I think these are the questions that have to be addressed and answered in this situation. I, as a medical doctor, want to see people lose weight for the health benefits that it brings. And if the GLP-1 agonists, with their, at least our current understanding that there are no significant right now long-term health issues, there are some concerns coming forward that are regarding maybe osteoporosis in women, a few other things like that. But as far as major health concerns, there aren't any yet. I'm an advocate for using them to jumpstart, get the process going, and work with people on this complex disease called obesity.
Yeah. So what you're saying is obesity has health concerns. And whatever the health concerns there are about GLP-1s, obesity has more.
Correct.
Especially if it's making you pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and therefore utilizing them is helpful. Stopping them will be difficult unless there's substantial changes in your life. And so if they can get you to the point where you can go for good walks around your block, and then you can incorporate that in your life and you can build on it, then maybe there's some dynamic by which it can be done. Is it hard to discontinue the use of GLP-1s? Is there like severe withdrawals or anything like that?
There's not at all.
You can just stop and
it has no tolerance or any withdrawal effect from it. Okay. It's just that all the hunger returns. All of the previous metabolic sort of issues that you had physically will return if you haven't dealt with the emotional and mental and even spiritual aspects of obesity, then it's all going to be regained. If you will.
There's one more question that mentions GLP-1s, but it's in the context of some other stuff, so we'll hit that as we come to it. The first question that we have from the 15th is, can you speak to the spiritual components of addictions? This could be general inequities, roots of addiction, trauma, unhealed wounds, false identity, and so on. What are the spiritual components of addiction? Jill, did you want to jump on that one first?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's probably a lot of them, but overall, addiction doesn't come out of nowhere. It is like it's a short-term, unsustainable solution to a problem. So people are avoiding pain or don't know how to feel emotions, or emotions have always been really overwhelming, or they're in chronic stress. So like generational inequities, that makes sense, Trauma, usually it's just you don't know how to cope with it, or you want to escape the feelings. So I think there's usually something underneath addiction to get curious about. And mostly I focus on trauma in my clinical work, so maybe I'm biased, but I think there's a present focus of how do we interact with the addiction? And then there's always those questions of, why is this addiction happening? Like, why is this the solution? And getting curious about that. And so you often have to get to a place where you can interact with the addiction and get other coping skills first before you can really handle the trauma. Because if you just open up all the wounds and they don't have any coping skills, they're just going to keep doing the addiction. So you do have to kind of come at it from both ends, but there's usually something underneath an addiction.
So I hasten to add pastorally that one of the things we talk a lot more about is sort of what you might call the etiology or the purveyance, or where sin comes from, or like where a behavior comes from. And sometimes we think that if we can explain where the behavior comes from, that behavior no longer has its original moral status. So if I can explain why I committed adultery, it's so understandable now that maybe it's not even that big a deal. And that is not the Christian view at all, right? Like the assumption is all of our sins as well as all of our virtues, in some ways you can explain the origin of all of them in some kind of narrative for some kind of reason. But that doesn't change their moral status at all, right? And so we can say that a behavior that we do for a reason of addiction that the Bible classifies as a sin, right, is still a sin. It's against nature, it's against God, it's against our neighbor, it's against our own body.
It's harmful.
And so on. It's harmful, and we should stop doing it. Then understand it. So that's supposed to give us the moral impulse to say, I have to stop this.
Yeah, like something has to change.
Right, something has to change.
Yeah.
And if you can feel that moral weight, it'll keep you from hitting what Alcoholics Anonymous calls rock bottom. Because rock bottom is relative. Rock bottom can just be your death. There's no like literal. So when you have the moral focus that God gives in Scripture and says, look, you can't do action X, and you feel appropriate shame for action X because you know it's a sin, you can hit rock bottom and be like, I have to do something about this. If you have that moral gravity, then it sometimes is beneficial to say, okay, wait, so why do I want to do this so much? Why do I have the relationship I have with food? Why am I acting out in this certain kind of way? And then try to work towards healing. And then sometimes healing is necessary for triumph over that addiction. But I think it's important that when we don't just call things addictions and say, well, it's addiction, therefore it's a disease, therefore I have no moral culpability, therefore I'm a victim, right? And what that leads is that there's no rock bottom that stops you. So you have to say, wait, I have to do something about this. Because most people will only change when they have no other choice. But one of the ways we can have no other choice is morally, where we cannot accept the kind of person that we are if we continue to do this. I have no choice. And if you don't have no other choice for moral reasons, then it has to be some other reason, which is often which is going to be more tragic, more extreme, more desperate. So if we have a clear spiritual moral faculty of what's right and wrong, that will lead us to seek spiritual reasons and dynamics that are leading to our addictive behavior, which can lead us to healing. Does that make sense? So I totally agree with what you said, but I don't want anybody to think that if we believe that, we have any less of a conviction about the moral classification of the actions that we did.
Right.
Or those that were done to us.
Right.
Right? Because if we see that we've had a trauma and that trauma was from an abuse of some kind, when we go back there, we want to be able to say, that was wrong.
Yeah.
But you can only say that was wrong and begin to heal, recognizing that if there are things that are wrong for moral reasons. And so sometimes by making excuses for ourselves, we're actually undermining the logic of our own healing as we work our way back to where things came from. Do you guys have any comments about this?
Well, Nick, I recall a statement that you made regarding this in the sense that our flesh seeks to satisfy itself with idols. And so I have to, say in comment to you that what led to the addiction, and that's usually a spiritual component of seeking to find a way to feel good or escape or whatever it is, such that once a person is addicted, there is a brain component. I mean, their brain reward system is messed up.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, there is some degree of brain disease, but it has been brought on by behaviors that sought to find some type of whatever, if it was a euphoric state or an escape oftentimes from pain. That, I think, also is clearly a spiritual component that leads to the brain changes that occur with addiction. So.
Yeah. I think sometimes people think that if, like, for example, if I went to college and then my parents divorced the week after I got to college, and that really hurt me, and then I was already going to parties, and so and then that led to me behaving like an alcoholic, let's say. You could say, oh, it was because my parents did this and that really hurt me. But you're like, well, yeah, but you could have done a number of things with that pain. It's never just the trauma. It's never just the pain, right? It's that you chose to respond in this way. Now you can say, well, I didn't think of any other options, or because of my upbringing, this is how I saw people handle it before, or so on, or because of the abuse itself, it tended towards further abuse in this way. Like if a adult got you drunk at home and like you, or somebody was sexually abused at a young age, sometimes that sexualizes their response to things. But one of the things we always have to say is, like, I was still a participant in this, and a part of me that I knew wasn't good is what I turned to rather than something else. And sometimes people think that's like blaming the victim, but actually sometimes taking moral responsibility for the areas where we did have some control, instead of thinking about the areas where we didn't have control, is an important step in, like, realizing we have agency and we can be part of the solution, because we were part of making the problem, actually. And thus we can be even if like 80% of this is controlled for us, that 20%, if we can take our agency in that thing, we can flip the whole thing sometimes. I remember Arthur Brooks saying that, like, somewhere between 55% and 70% of our happiness was determined by things we had no control over. But the fact that we had control over maybe 30% was still enough as to whether or not we would be happy or unhappy. And that our agency therefore made all the difference, even if the majority was controlled by other people. And that's really true of all of our lives. A lot more than we want to admit is outside of our control. But the 20% we control, or 10% or 35%, is very strategic. And if we can engage with faithful agency in that, do the will of God, trust God, and act in faith, it can really change the whole dynamic.
Yeah, my favorite passage talking about healing in this light is actually, it's Hebrews 12, and it's talking about healing as a discipline, which is kind of, it sounds harsh to people, but when you think about it, what we're talking about, healing is, we think of like, oh, I'll feel better. And you actually don't feel better for a long time. Like
no discipline seems pleasant at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't feel better for a long time. Healing is really hard, and it is a responsibility. Like it's something you have to say, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to be a victim forever because of what happened to me. And at the end of Hebrews, there's a passage in Hebrews 12, 1 through 12. And it says, therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. And there's this sort of like dynamic of we continually harm ourselves when we choose to remain a victim to sin and to the curse and to suffering. So there is a healing that is a responsibility, but it's also the only way to freedom as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note too that like sin's not only addictive, but it's deceptive. I like the imagery that St. Augustine talks about with he had a sexual addiction, and he's like, yeah, I forged every single chain, but then I came to love it and I couldn't live without it. And I was like, I want to be free from this, but not yet, you know, right? And so there needs to be a recognition. Nick was talking about it being a moral recognition. Otherwise it's going to be a much more painful recognition.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. One of the ways that a lot of younger people in particular are managing social anxiety is with THC of some kind. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this either from younger people saying, before I go to a family event, I'll take a couple of gummies or I'll get high, or I've talked to people who are older who will either do that, or they're so heartbroken because their 20-something-year-old kid shows up to a family event clearly high. And that's the way because they have social anxiety about their family or something else. And you see this with people. So the person asks, what are some actually healthy alternatives to manage social anxiety instead of using THC? Are CBD gummies or CBD oil helpful? I don't think I can answer the gummies I don't know what CBD gummies do if they don't have THC in them.
Yeah, they're not.
They won't get you high.
They don't get you high or anything. Yeah.
So that would be a placebo effect.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, just tell yourself.
So maybe know that you can actually do it if you can do it with a CBD
Buy
gum.
some just gummy bears off of something and have your roommate give them to you and tell you that they are THC gummies and eat a couple of those before you go. Yeah, I mean, sometimes just, So what are some healthy alternatives to manage social anxiety?
I mean, if I could just, speaking of CBD, I know some people that have, used it and they say it helps. I think it's placebo, but whatever. I can't speak for other people. Some people do have success with it, but
it was really hot for a while. It doesn't seem to be as cool as it was just a few years ago, but THC seems to be on the rise.
Miracle, exactly. Yes. Miracle drug.
Yeah, it's all perception and anecdotal observation that people make, and if they think it's going to make them feel better,
it's probably worth it to them.
It probably will. And if they spend $400 for it, which they were doing in Colorado for a period of time, and bringing it to Wisconsin, of course it's going to be good. I spent $400, so it's going to help me.
Yeah, and I don't know that it doesn't help. I mean, there isn't good clinical evidence that it helps, right?
There is no clinical evidence.
So okay, so what are some alternatives then? Social anxiety, it's a big thing.
Yeah. I have a few therapeutic kind of thoughts.
You're not going to like the answer to this. Here we go.
So I think there's some giving, it's going to be a scaffolding, I think. If you really deal with really inhibiting social anxiety, that's really real. And it builds on itself because then you're nervous and then things go poorly and then you're going to feel worse next time. So we have a note in here about exposure therapy. But first, I'm going to say that if you need an out, I would give yourself an out. Other than THC, I would say okay, I'm going to try to go to this event. I'm going to give myself, 15 minutes. And then I'm just going to go outside and walk around the block and get something from my car and take a break and then come back in. There's ways to scaffold in some healthy outs if it feels really stressful for you so that you can grow in your tolerance of it and your resilience, really. And so I think there's ways to work with where you're at and find what could you, ask someone to, I had a season of I've had lots of seasons of really intense anxiety, but in one season, I had a friend who we like talked about it ahead of time, and she's like, if you are feeling that level of anxiety, just call me and I'll pray for you. Like, don't talk. Like, we didn't talk about it because that engages the anxiety. She would just pray for me, and then it would feel better because it was both a distraction and real spiritual like warfare. And so I think just finding some outs for yourself that are along those lines, and then exposure therapy. I mean, that's a clinical type word for something that I think God has also given instruction for in the scriptures. But basically, try the thing and for a little bit and say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm not by okay, I mean like I'm not dead. Like that didn't kill me to talk to my grandpa for 5 minutes, right? Like I mean, people feel really nervous around people, right? And so like I'm literally okay. I'm gonna be fine. And then I think do it scared. Like if your voice is shaking, who cares, right? Like do the thing that matters, even if your voice is shaking, even if you're nervous, and you can even say like, yeah, I'm a little nervous.
Yeah. And I know you've done that. You've had situations where you're like, this is really hard, and you did it anyway. And
yeah, this is very personal for me. So if you need someone to talk to, I'm happy to talk.
Yeah. There are some one of the things to do is also the old ways. Like here are some of the old ways that people dealt with this stuff. One is they learned manners. So for example, what manners are these things that you do in social situations meant to put other people at ease. But also what they do is they put you at ease because you know what you're supposed to do. So learning manners can be helpful. I know a lot of young people that frankly just have terrible manners. And because they don't say please and thank you, because they don't give their last name when they give their name, because they don't know who to give their attention to or how to orient their body, because they don't shake hands well, because they don't do any of these natural interactions well, you literally have to make everything up as you go along. The whole point of manners is like, it's all set. You say hello, you receive hello, you say please, you say thank you, you shake hands, you say goodbye. All these little dynamics are meant to put people at ease. And what happened for a long time, I mean, probably starting at least in the 1960s, but all the way through to the present, is all this stuff is stuffy and stupid and nonsense and phony and blah, blah, blah. It's like everything's the catcher in the rye and nothing is sincere, right? But manners are actually meant to put you at ease and to show your sincerity and to show that you care. And it's amazing how it's like manners will tell you what to do in a lot of these situations and you don't have to make it up. And other people respond really well to manners, it turns out. Oftentimes, even people who think they're stupid, when they get treated with the dignity of manners, they really like it.
Yeah.
You know? One is you also can prep on conversations. There's probably 12 questions that you're definitely going to be asked. What are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
You know, are you like, you have any hobbies? Do you have a significant other? Like, I mean, just expect to be asked some of these questions. And if you don't like your answers because you don't like where your life is at, my advice is learn some jokes. Learn some good jokes, and sometimes even making fun of yourself, you know, because everybody likes to laugh and people like it when you make them laugh. And if you can make people laugh, you don't have to have accomplished anything because you're still a pleasure to be around because you're enjoyable. And then the other thing is that the Bible says that everybody is thought wise when they shut their mouth, and better to that than to be a fool and to take away all question about whether or not you're stupid. And so keeping your mouth shut, not spouting stupid folly, which is probably would include most people's political beliefs, and listening intently to other people and asking them caring follow-up questions. Yeah. Before you know it, man, you are a pro. Yeah. A pro being around other people, and you'll realize it.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that last one. Just like, if you're nervous about talking, just ask people questions, show genuine interest in them, and people will open up. You'll feel comfortable. You'll learn a lot just having that curious mindset. Yeah.
And generally, they're going to ask you questions then back. That,
they will.
Not always, though. People like talking about themselves. So sometimes you can get really far with a couple questions. You just keep asking more questions.
40 minutes later, and then they ask you something, you just deflect it back. You're like, boom.
Yeah. My wife is the world champion at this, where you can ask her stuff, and she will give you a short answer and then ask you a question. In fact, I've had walks where we've gone on walks, and I had like halfway through the walk, I have to be like, no,
it's your turn.
It's your turn. Yeah. And because she's just, and she's not usually doing it tied. She's usually doing it because she's willing to listen, you know, to what you have to say. Yeah. But I think that's a very real, people will ask you questions, but it's amazing how if you just give a little bit of an answer, you can go right back and asking them a question, and they'll, especially if if somebody keeps asking you questions, steer the conversation to something they really like,
Yes.
like a hobby or a deep interest of theirs. And then most people will get going.
Yeah.
And if you can be genuinely interested, you might really enjoy it, you know?
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about what you're saying about just planning for conversations. It seems like a lot of people are very concerned now in social anxiety is centered around obligation. Like, I'm scared someone's going to kind of control me or like want me to do something. And so I think having just, or like they're not going to like my answer, or they're going to have advice for me that I don't want, you know, when I say I don't have a job or whatever. So I think even prepping scripts for like, how are you going to respond to that? Like, what's your worst fear is going to happen that they're going to think or say? And then just plan something to say in response to that. And then it's already done. So you don't feel that anxiety in the moment.
How do you say no?
Yeah. How do you say no? Like, that's in a nice way, in lots of different ways. So,
yeah. And I think like one of the things I think some people don't realize is one of the reasons they have social anxiety for some situations is they're not really having real conversations in the other places of their life. They're not really interacting with people deeply. And then they're not practicing like deeper human interactions. And so then when they go to another place, they don't know how to do it. And sometimes it's just, you've got to start talking to the people in your life. You have to broach topics that you might not otherwise broach. But I think if you engage, you expose yourself to the anxiety. That's always necessary to grow over anxieties. Anxieties will only yield to direct action against them. Anxiety is like bullying. If you give it ground, it just increases. Only with direct resistance can you get a bully to stop, and only with direct resistance can you get an anxiety to lessen.
Yeah.
And so you can then prep yourself so that the direct action you take against your anxiety, you're more prepared for it and you can engage with it better. Right. And sometimes having somebody with you is great too. I mean, like sometimes bringing a friend is, you know, the best you can do. Okay. You guys want to move on? Do you want more?
Well, I was just going to echo and say that, and the argument against self-medication prior to doing socially awkward, maybe interactions, you can't be on your A game. How can you, if you're taking gummies and or drinking alcohol before you go to try to lubricate yourself, how can you be on your A game to really ask those questions, answer questions, and really be fully present? That's the thing. You're not really fully present in that moment. So that's, I think, important to realize that's just not the best way to go. Yeah.
I think especially anxiety people are feeling with their families, spending time with their family. Your family does love you, even if your relationship is problematic for the most part. And don't waste those moments being high when you go. And then the other thing too, we talk a lot about how like younger people are having difficulty finding good romantic partners. That you cannot really get a sense of who somebody is, or let them get a sense of really who you are in that kind of way, in terms of like real interest, if somebody's high or drunk.
It's an altered state.
Yeah. And so there's that problem. And then there's also the issue of what we call the conscientiousness problem, which is conscientiousness is that you always do your best relative to the resources that you have, not because every situation is an equally good opportunity. It's because when the good opportunity comes along, you don't know when it's going to be. And so you have to always be doing the right thing so that when your opportunity arises, you can take advantage of it. This is really true in dating. You don't want to make a bad impression in that moment that the potential love of your life walks into the room. You don't want that to be the moment you're high. You want that to be the moment where you're your best self, and you never know when that's going to be. And so especially people who are like looking for somebody to date, or they want to find somebody that they care about, being in social situations, high or drunk, is either you're not prepared for that moment to happen, or what's also happening more and more now with younger people getting together romantically is matchmaking. The online dating stuff, the tech stuff, the swiping, it does not work. So what people are turning to more and more is other people helping people pair up. So who you are around people you might never be romantically interested in, they might be the matchmaker or the potential matchmaker for the person you could find. And they are not getting a good impression of you. They're getting a shallow impression of you, like whatever being high and being drunk tends to produce. And so there's like, as you work down here, there's more and more and more reasons why what Bill said, I think, is accurate and functionally really important. All right, you guys want to move on?
Sure.
Okay. Here, question. On the genes are not destiny. With rates as you listed up to 50%, like being genetically determined, why do we even think that genes are are something that are really important, like an Alzheimer's gene or a alcohol addiction gene. So why are genes important if they're not determinative?
I'm not a scientist, Bill. I'm looking at you.
I was like, all right, Bill, go for it.
I'll go ahead and
Awesome.
speak to that to a little bit. I know we did that in our lecture somewhat, but the genes that have been isolated and felt to code for making proteins, particularly that either in the Alzheimer's gene, proteins that are produced by the astrocytes in the brain that help to break down tau proteins, that sort of thing, as well as then in alcohol addiction. It's basically proteins that work in terms of how a person would metabolize alcohol, whether they would metabolize them quickly or not very well at all. And so it's been associated with fairly different ethnic groups have higher levels of some of those proteins, other genes or proteins, and lower levels of the proteins that then lead to probably more of a population that has more of a problem with alcohol use. So that's when I had mentioned that these genes are not destiny. They're saying that there are people that have the Alzheimer, APOE, for instance, 4 gene, who will never develop Alzheimer's. And then there are those who develop Alzheimer's who do not have the gene. And so it is not determinate. And that's why it's very difficult for me to advise people to have these genetic tests done. It creates anxiety. It creates worry every time you forget something. You think I'm starting to have Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
What was that?
You know,
Or a false sense of security.
Or a false sense of security.
Very much so. And because of the fact that we don't have any cure or any really adequate treatment for Alzheimer's, why would you do that? I have chosen not to do that. I have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, fairly strong, but I certainly have chosen not to do that.
And the preventative actions are the same no matter what, right? Like a good bit of exercise, keep using your mind a lot. There's certain ways you can eat well, but it's the same for everybody, right?
Yeah. It is the same for everybody.
In general,
my understanding
too.
My understanding with Alzheimer's is there is one version that's very early onset that is highly genetically determined and very difficult to escape. And the rest are, it can happen, it can make it more likely, but the preventative dynamics are the same. And if you do those preventative dynamics, you have a really good chance of not developing it.
And I think we know, and Jill can speak to this probably even better than me, that if you have a family history of alcohol abuse and you grew up in a family that had alcohol abuse, and you, I think you have to be concerned about that and probably exercise a lot of extra temperance and judgment regarding how much alcohol you drink. And so there's probably some familial genetic component there that we haven't really identified. More that's just more population sort of studies is really more our family studies, I should say.
One of the scientific studies you sent around while we were preparing the paper seems to equate to that, like some people that may be more predisposed biologically to become addicted to alcohol are also the same people more genetically predisposed to not process it well and for it to produce more health problems. So that if you are more likely to naturally be addicted, it's also worse for you physically. And if you find yourself in that camp, then hey man, staying away is much more salient for you for that reason.
And we really clinically can't apply the screening for alcohol genes to a population of 300 and so million people. It's just economically unfeasible, and it doesn't really change probably very much.
Do you think that would be true 20 years from now?
I don't think so. I honestly don't think we'll do that, just because again, the cost of that type of thing and its utility and how much it's going to change and reduce alcoholism or, if you will, alcohol use disorder. I don't think it will make any difference, frankly.
Yeah, I wonder, like, when we think as Christians about what would the goal of something like that be, I think we have to think about what is abundant life in Christ. And it's not dependent on our genes. Like, we get the card we're dealt, and we have to, we apply godliness and we apply faith, and we, do what we can with what we have. And I mean, I had cancer when I was young, so I also have to like not allow myself to think too much about genes, right? It's like I could go into hyperdrive anxiety thinking too much about it, and then my life is robbed from me, right? And so there's like this certain level of, as a culture, we have a really high value of physical health, and we can really focus on that for a false sense of security and like a false sense of destiny of like, this is what's going to happen to me. And we don't know what's going to happen to us. And we have to really, this question gets to me at like, we've got to grapple with our fear of death as people and as a society, because we are all going to die and we don't know what it's going to be. And you can do your best to, be there for your children and your generations as long as possible, and live an abundant life. But it's not on this earth. So.
Yeah. And I think the Alzheimer's gene, I think it's that the alcohol addiction gene too, is that how you live your life and what your character will be like is always going to be predisposed by your genetics. Yeah. You're always going to have things in your temperament, how quick you are to lose your temper, maybe like how fluid your sense of self is. There's a number of these things that are I think profoundly affected by your genetic makeup, but that doesn't determine whether or not you can be godly or not. Whether through faith you can live in pursuit of righteousness by faith live or not. Right. And you'll be a different version. Like there was no chance whatever version of Christian I am going to be that Bill was going to be. That was predetermined genetically before we were both born. But that he could be a godly version of himself or a worldly version of himself. And same for me. That is within both of our power, so to speak. And I think that's where we need to focus our attention in terms of what's predetermined and what isn't predetermined and how much that matters.
Well, yeah, because determinism isn't a new idea at all. I mean, I think in the ancient world and medieval world even, they had a stronger view of determinism than we do. It was just the stars or another source, but they believe strongly that there's a lot you can't control, but you can control what it means. Yeah. Or you can overcome it by enduring or whatever. And there's a really famous quote in Shakespeare where he says one of the tricks of man is to blame his goatish disposition on the stars. And we should, and was Shakespeare trying to humiliate that? He's like, we shouldn't do that. That's not wise or right. Yeah. Okay. I think I was just thinking like the movie Gattaca, like it's probably 25 years old or so, but this idea of like, are we determined by the science, by the genes? And it's like, no, there's still this thing within man called his soul, his will that can overcome adversity or be broken by it, even if he has everything given to him. Yeah,
I could talk more about that too. Okay, let's move on though. Can relief lead to resilience? Example, as a first step, if somebody is struggling with weight, can you give them a GLP-1 that could break the cycle of growing in obesity and then create momentum for them to change their lifestyle, like getting more exercise and so on, so that using the medication at least over the short term helps them get to where they need to get to do the other things. Same thing with SSRIs, like taking a medication for depression. Can that help you get to the treatment thing and move in a direction? What are the pros and cons, or what's the dynamics of that? I mean, I do know that from a therapeutic perspective, like in terms of counseling and in terms of medicine, that is a favorite approach. But what do you guys want to say about that more? I have lots of thoughts as always.
Yeah, I think it can work. I think each situation requires discernment. So I don't think there's a blanket yes or no. But yes, relief can lead to resilience if you use it for that. Resilience is not formed accidentally, and so relief will not automatically lead to resilience. It won't create resilience, but it can help you develop resilience if the pain was so severe that it was so inhibiting that you couldn't develop strength.
Yeah, if it was debilitating.
Right,
if the condition was debilitating, that it was hard to create resilience.
Because resilience is healing and strength, right? And so like if the pain is preventing both of those so severely, that relief can help you then get enough healing and develop enough strength that you can do that without the crutch, so to speak. Then yeah, it can. I think there is a note here too that there's always the danger that it's not used for that, and you take away the severe or the pain at all, and there's no felt need to change. And so sometimes I've seen SSRIs, which are anti-anxiety or antidepressants, often also used for anti-anxiety medications. But sometimes people are in really awful situations, and that's why they feel awful. So if you give them medication, I'm not saying we shouldn't. The relief can also lead to this, like, okay, now I'm like feeling a little bit better. I can change my situation. And also it could be like, this is fine. And then you're not feeling awful about something you should feel awful about.
Yeah, there was one of the books we read. I can't remember if it was Unshrunk or Bad Therapy.
It
or
was
whatever.
Bad Therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, where there was an example of a woman she came in because she was depressed, and then she took some SRI or something like that, and her therapist was like, well, "How do you feel?" And she's like, "It's awful because I feel fine, but my husband is still a huge SOB, and I shouldn't feel fine." Right? So there's a sense in which it becomes in some ways a catch-22, because on one level people are debilitated by the pain or the situation. The medication helps with the debilitating reality, but then the debilitating reality was also the pain that was the motivation to change. And so when you take away the debilitating thing, if you also take away the pain, then human beings we're just not good at finding motivation other than pain. And so what often happens is that the motivation drops off as the pain dissipates. Yeah. And then nothing happens. And it in most people, it creates a catch-22, and they don't get anywhere. Yeah.
We have a very skewed view of emotions too. Like emotions are responses to reality. And so like depression makes sense if you're in a depressing situation, right? Like if you're stuck or you like haven't grieved something, or you're really angry and nothing's changing, like depression is going to happen, right?
Yeah, anxiety and depression are the motivations.
Right. And anxiety happens when like
may not be good.
I'm not in control, like everything around, yes, so what can I control? Right. So there's lots of layers to what causes those things, but that's usually what's treated, and then sometimes the relief it doesn't automatically lead to resilience. So relief is not bad, but it won't produce resilience on its own. Yeah.
Can I?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think just anytime we're taking one of these products, we have to remember that we're engaging with a multi-billion-dollar, right? In some instances, like maybe even trillion-dollar, right, corporation. And their goal isn't necessarily for you to be healthy. It's to make money off of you. And so it doesn't mean these can't be good tools, but you have to go in knowing that you're working with actors that don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. Sometimes they don't even know what your best interest is. And so you have to be very intentional that you're using this as a tool to get to a goal that you're focused on and that's good and worth pursuing.
The GLP-1 agonist industry is an example of that,
exactly.
Very much, Monty. And the fact that 70% of people who stop these medications regain all of their weight says that no resilience was developed during that time. I got relief of this obesity or the effects of the obesity on me, but I didn't do anything then to build that resilience and that change in my life and my thinking about food and reward systems and all of those sorts of things to make any change.
And what's I'm like, these are highly popular. It's like 1 out of every 5 Americans has already been on one, and like something like 12% is on one now. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's around there, isn't
You're
it?
close to the right numbers there, yes. Yeah. And the majority of those are women who are in my life stage,
it seems. At least like 80% of my ads on social media are for GLP-1s. Or for like things that help offset the side effects. Yeah. It's really awful. Yeah.
Side note, I have no idea who the internet thinks I am, but I get all these like, are you 70 plus and looking for companionship? Like, what do I read? Thinks I'm a senior citizen. Looking for a mail order bride or whatever. I don't even know.
Yeah. So I think, if we go back and look at some of these questions, like for example, with weight, with the GLP-1s, it may not just like, it's also not true. It's one thing to say, your life is going to end up being your responsibility and you have to find agency. That's not the same thing as saying everything is totally your fault.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Like our current,
Good point.
is it Surgeon General? I can't remember, Robert Kennedy, who's like, his view is like, most of the obesity in America is not your fault. Like our food system is so bad.
Yeah.
It's true.
And also our work system and the sedentary nature of it, or the work schedules that Americans work that have so much focus on being at work and not exercising and so on, or we don't have a lot of outdoor recreation in certain places. In some northern climates, you're inside a lot of it. Like there's all kinds of things that kind of add into the soup that makes obesity the 70% problem, right? And so it's one thing to say, it's not all your fault. It's another thing to say is, who is coming to rescue you from this? And the answer is, well, probably nobody. Probably nobody. And so you have to ask the question, like, what kind of agency can I take? Because is the government going to change the food system in America sufficiently so that I'm going to be healthy? I mean, probably not in any of our lifetimes, not sufficiently, right? And then GLP-1s may or may not be a long-term solution relative to the side effects that they could create, which seem my understanding of them is that those are increasing, that we're counting more and more of them as people are on them more.
More side effects.
Yeah. And so we're trying to find something that's better, and we don't have to be perfect. We just have to get to functional to where we can be relatively healthy and good stewards of our bodies. And we might need to add to that, like sub-communities within the church. We might need to like I've been open to like, maybe we need a food co-op at the church where people can get healthier food easier. Like, and there are sub-communities that are doing different things with food, doing different things with nutrition. I've always thought that like, it's silly for a bunch of moms to all cook dinner. It seems like you should just get 4 families and one family cooks every night or something, one set of dishes, one set of, but that kind of, we could change the script. It takes creativity and that creativity takes agency and ideas.
Cooperation.
But it could happen. And the part of the problem with the governmentalization of the world and the white collarness of everything, like you have to have a master's degree to make any decisions sort of thing, is we lose our agency to actually create immediate workable solutions to even complex problems. And when it comes to things like food or even depression, like our separateness and our loneliness and stuff like that, that we could do things about that. We could have new ways of living together and being in each other's presence and supporting each other. That could be really helpful. So I think that I don't want us to get the sense that because we were saying GLP-1s might not be the whole answer, or SSRIs, that, and if you have social anxiety, or if you have depression, or if you're struggling with anxiety, like you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There is a sense in which that's true, right? The verse that Jill read was that as God disciplines us and leads us in faith, there's this way in which we have to strengthen our own feeble arms. Like there's a sense in which there's a scene in the movie Unbreakable years ago where the main character doesn't realize he's a superhero, and they keep putting more weight on the bar, and no matter how much weight they put on the bar, he can just barely lift it. And I think that's a metaphor for a lot of life, that like there's a lot of things that you don't think you can do, but if you put your full strength into it, you'll realize you have just barely enough strength to do it. And then the next day there's something that's even harder, and you're like, well, I can't do that because the last thing I did was everything I had. But you find that if you try it and you really do it, you have just enough strength to do it. And there's this principle like in the human person that like, if you in faith try, it's amazing how you have just enough to do it in many cases, especially if you get help. And you work with people.
We also need relationships in that. And so if you feel like you can't do it yourself, you can't. So that makes sense. So like, cry out to God and reach out to the church, and
For me, this is why the Christian answer has always been so encouraging. It's like you exist in the presence of both grace and agency. That God says, you're always failing. It's going to be okay, right? Jesus has performed perfectly for you. You are in him through faith. You belong. And we've already stipulated that this is a huge failure, which brings a lot of humility. And then yet you're made in God's image. You're being renewed in the image of your creator. You are steward over everything in your life. You are called to a particular destiny. God has prepared good works for you to do beforehand. He's renewing you in the image of your creator, right? He's sovereignly working everything for your good. He's bringing you into glory. And all of that hope gives you a foretaste in the present. Like that's all; those are simultaneously happening. And so, for somebody like me, who is like, if I look at my day, I have what people call ADD, so I have constant performance failures in my life. And yet, as a trajectory, my life has gone pretty well. And it's that merging of those two things where like I can apply myself and create things going in the direction of God's will in my life that are good for me and for everybody in my life. Even if throughout my day I might have 15 performance failures.
Yeah.
That I would say, oh, it's my neurology. Well, okay, but if I make fewer excuses and engage more in agency, I can move in the right direction.
Yeah.
My life can go well. And I think that it's that inspiration that we want people to have. That Jill has faced anxiety and she's fought through trauma and she is helping people with that, right? Like I have ADD and I'm leading a large organization, right? Like we can do these things.
Yeah, that's good. On a side note for this, before we move from GLP, I'm wondering if you can just talk for a moment about body image and how that's being driven and like is it kind of an eating disorder, either substitute or aid?
Yeah. So apparently I have had a lot of problems. So another problem I've had that I haven't mentioned yet in this podcast is that I've had an eating disorder, anorexia, when I was a teenager. And so what terrifies me about GLP-1s for women who aren't obese and who still want to use them is that it makes an eating disorder so much easier because it takes away your hunger. And I'm like, yeah, that would be really easy. Like that's the only thing that's really unbearable when you have an eating disorder is like that you're just really hungry. So I think there's just practical things of like how it enables that addiction. So it's not addictive in and of itself as a drug, but it enables other kinds of addictions. We can be addicted to all sorts of things and behaviors.
That addiction of control. It enables it.
Right, it enables it. So I think just knowing yourself and why do you want it? Is it really a medical reason? I think I've seen so many ads for this for just women as part of like a healthy lifestyle. And I think it's interesting to see like trends.
It's like Frosted Flakes is part of the healthy breakfast.
And then there's like things to offset it. So like Grunes are these gummies with like a lot of fiber, right? And a side effect of GLP-1s is that it can be like, cause constipation and stuff. So like I get all these ads for Grunes, which are these gummies. It's like you can get all your vegetables in a gummy. You can get everything in a gummy. And
there's some THC in there maybe.
This helps with your GLP-1s. Like that's like how it's advertised. Yeah. So that's like the normalization of it is concerning. Yeah. Because I think there's these trends in eating disorders even of like which ones are normalized and having a lot of like purity in your eating is also really in right now. So like not eating anything that's bad. I mean, that can also be an eating disorder. And so these can just all it can enable it, I think. So
my concern too is that as GLP-1s become ubiquitous, the pressure to change the food system in America
goes away
down.
Yeah.
And so people are like, you know what I mean? And the whole like kind of Maha like that, like we got to really change this whole system. There was a good bit of pressure on that over the last 7 or 8 years, and more technology is being applied to it. And I know that there are also some gaming of that system financially too. But like one of the things that GLP-1s concern me about is that there will be less focus on changing the whole system everybody's marinating in.
Because you're not healthier if you're skinnier. You could eat terribly and not be healthier and be, skinnier at the same time. I think, at least with.
I mean, there are some health things that are directly related to obesity, but we'll still be.
Our HHS secretary Robert Kennedy says, we have an epidemic of obesity, but also of malnutrition.
Yes, yes, you can be malnourished,
which is somewhat ironic.
It is really ironic.
It truly is.
Yeah. Okay, we should move on. All right. So I hear a lot about using mushrooms as a way to help with, quote, spiritual problems or help come to spiritual awakenings. Are there any major medical downsides? Okay, that question is asked in a very specific way. We're going to answer some questions this person didn't ask, like, are there any spiritual downsides?
Are there any upsides?
So, So let me read a quick list of reasonably well-known medical downsides, and then maybe you can make some more comments on them if you know more about them. But here are a few that Perplexity put together for me. Acute panic, paranoia, and confusion are often the result. So some people take psilocybin, that kind of stuff, to have mind-opening, like peace-creating, ego death kind of experiences. The problem is that you can have exactly the opposite. of that, right? So there's acute anxiety, panic, paranoia, and confusion. And if you take an 8-hour version of it, you get to be in that for 8 hours. Like there's no way out once you start, right? 2, it impairs judgment and it creates dangerous behavior. It produces cardiovascular strain. It is triggering. It's triggering or can be worsening for psychosis or for invulnerable people. It has persistent post-use psychological problems in some users. And those are the like very clinically affirmed ones. The things with more moderate evidence, but still scientific in nature, are hallucinogenic persisting perception disorders. So like after the hallucination is over, you still have hallucination-like symptoms. If you have a bad set or setting, it will amplify it. So if something happens while you're in the trip, that's like somebody's shouting, that will amplify into your trip and can really affect you negatively. And there's tolerance and psychological wear and tear from doing this a lot that can happen. And then in terms of experience based, there's like fear of losing control. There's existential distress. There's after effects of meaning saturation. So sometimes people feel really meaning saturated, and it's like when people go on a mission trip and they realize that they're like rich in America, and it like creates like a bunch of like emotional, like what am I supposed to do? What does my life mean? People will have these like quote spiritual experiences. They have no idea what to do with them, right? And that can be really actually not good rather than really enlightening. There's moral and identity disruption and concerns about self-experimentation among clinicians. There's some other things, but those are some of the main ones. Even some of the like celebrities of taking mushrooms, like Paul Stamets is probably one of the most famous people in America for mushrooms of all kinds, but including psychological ones.
Who's he?
Paul Stamets. He wrote the kind of the Bibles on growing mushrooms, like all the way from like food mushrooms to medicinal mushrooms to psychedelic mushrooms. And he's very open about. He's actually been on Joe Rogan a couple of times, talking about the medicinal possibilities and the mood altering possibilities of medical mushrooms. But he also talks a lot about him taking magic mushrooms too. And a couple of them, he talks about how like they didn't have the trip right. They drove while they were at like a national park and they were kind of lost. And like, you're listening to me like somebody could have gotten hurt. And this is a guy who like really understands mushrooms. So anyway, those are some of them.
Okay.
Well, in the bottom line, Nick, that you refer to is that these are trying to induce a trip, or if you will, an altered state that's almost you say altered consciousness, which therefore I think the person asking this question is saying, would you be more open and therefore amenable to a spiritual awakening that maybe God could use? Well, I don't think we see God using that in the Bible at all. I mean, of course, they didn't have the substances we have necessarily now, but
they had mushrooms.
Yes, I've read that in some of your information, but I don't see that being used in a way that, at least biblically, that said, this is the way I speak into your life or into your consciousness is by you inducing an altered state. I hear him saying, no, I do that through meditation on God's word or focused prayer. You know, those are the ways I see that we are instructed as Christians to find spiritual awakening.
Yeah, I think of the verse, it's about wine, but I think it could be true of other intoxicating substances that, you know, don't be filled or drunk on wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. Right? The Holy Spirit is our spiritual help in relating with God. And I think that it's concerning to me that like mushrooms and other psychedelic substances have been used in other religions, pagan religions, to induce spiritual experiences, but those are false gods. So like I think to me it's like, oh, we have to make it feel like something's happening because there's no God there. So I agree that like it won't help Christian spirituality.
Yeah, you might be having a real spiritual experience. You just might not like the spirits you're dealing with.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like
I can't think of any Christian I've ever known that engaged in the use of those substances that I think it benefited them spiritually from a biblical framework. That the kind of holiness or the depth of faith or the sobriety of life that Scripture says is at the hallmarks of real spiritual transformation were present in them. And even the people that had kind of like ego death like experiences, they're kind of like, yeah, I just realized I was connected to everything, whatever, which you hear a lot from people. I don't see that producing actually real humility most of the time.
Yeah.
There is a certain kind of like stressed out, like everything's about what I do. Like people who are like workaholics who use some of these drugs and they're like, maybe I need to take things a little less seriously. I've seen that kind of change in people before. And it makes sense to me that some people that like maybe have post-traumatic stress disorder from like combat, that some kind of psychedelic use could help like them reframe some of that stuff. I don't see why that's
rewire.
Well, that's medicinal too.
It
yeah,
can be medicinal.
Exactly. That's a lot different than recreational. There's a lot of things that have good medicinal use that aren't just for you to have fun.
A number of the side effects do have to do with environment and framing where people are utilizing this. But I also think it is important to be fair to say that like there isn't really good evidence that it's like it'll poison you, right? But if you're trying to access something spiritually, it's I think what Bill said is one simple way to say it. It's like there's such things existed in the ancient world. There is no reference to any of it happening in any way among the biblical prophets or writers of God's word or his apostles or leaders or kings in which any of it was. In fact, I don't know if there's any reference to it, period. And some people presume it's there, like they'll read Ezekiel 1 and they'll be like, come on, this guy was on mushrooms, right? But there's no evidence of that. Right?
God can be weird.
And God can be weird. And people
on his own
in the Bible claim to come into prophetic trances without the help of such things.
Yeah.
And at times where they did not expect it, they didn't anticipate it happening. It just sort of happened. Usually, frankly, it happens in times of prayer. Like when Peter sees the vision of this thing coming down from heaven with unclean animals on it, and God saying, get up, kill and eat. He's on the roof just praying. Yeah. And God brings this vision. And the thing is that when it's over, Peter knows it's from God because he was not high. Like if you get high and you have hallucinations, you can't just be like, oh, that was God talking to me. You have no idea where any of this stuff is from. And you're certainly not in a state of mind to discern it. And afterwards, your memory is not going to be great. So I've talked to one of the people I like to talk to this about is there's a guy who's at Crossroads now. His name's John Sakatowski. And before he came to faith in college, he experimented with drugs pretty heavily, including psychedelics. And he said when he was taking them, he would have these kind of like soul opening, expansive experiences. And he was like, it felt really deep. It felt really spiritual. I thought I was going somewhere spiritually. He said, after I became a Christian the next year and I grew in faith, I realized actually it was just like another form of shallow. I had flipped from like one version of self-centered shallow to like this other like falsely spiritual, like, yeah, bro, I know I'm no big deal kind of, but it was still really shallow.
It's like a vapor. Like what is it around? What is the spirituality for?
Yeah. And he said that when he came to faith, in the growth and how it was working humility and like ethical dimensions into his life in which he was taking responsibility for himself. Like that was just a completely different spirituality than what he was experimenting with. And he was like, yeah, I realized why drugs were just a terrible idea on every level. And I find that way of, because I've always felt that way. I've talked to people who go on these trips and they're like, oh man, it was so spiritual. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not. Like not any kind of like loving your neighbor,
like what does it mean,
more morally substantive yourself, being deep. Like I don't see that happening with you. So that I don't see good fruit in it either. Yeah. So there's nothing about it in the Bible, right? We're supposed to be filled with the Holy Spirit, which makes us sober, right? Sobriety is a fundamental part of Christian spirituality, and this goes against it, not for it. We're not told to do any of these kinds of things, though these things existed. I don't see good spiritual fruit. And I mean, there's just a lot of this. So my big issue is not that there are medical negatives here. There are spiritual negatives, and they're very substantial.
Yeah. And the medical for this kind of medicine, it's like prescribed and in a certain treatment environment. So it's not a self-medication that's effective at all. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing here? Because sometimes people hear me say something, they'll be like, yeah, that's what I expected from some like religious fundamentalists and so on. But I have ADD. I have a very open personality. I'm naturally very creative. I'm very open to taking drugs. If I thought that would be expansive and helpful and useful, I have at different times in my life considered whether or not doing mushrooms would be beneficial for me, and whether or not maybe that would be part of God's will for like opening up some areas of my life where I have anxiety or I'm just emotionally closed off or whatever. And it's very tempting to do. And I know how to grow mushrooms. I'm really good at growing mushrooms. I could grow like piles and piles and piles. It was a hobby of mine for a while to grow mushrooms. And I just, after a while, I just thought, I don't think so. Because this is not a spirituality that I could share with others. Even if it worked, I wouldn't know if like for a lot of reasons like those I've shared, I just decided that this is not, though I would love to have a more mystical experience with God, a more mystical experience with myself, a more emotional openness. Like there's certain dynamics that it's tempting to think that something like that could help create. I don't think this is the God's prescribed means. I have to find more love. I have to pursue those things in ways that come through healing, through actual development, not by having a simulacrum of them in a psychedelic experience, which is essentially a counterfeit. Yeah. And they won't make them true of me when I come out of the psychosis. So, yeah. All right. Here's a question you guys can. We know the details of how alcohol makes dementia more likely later in life. Or do we know the details of how alcohol makes dementia more likely later in life? Or do we merely see a correlation without knowing how they actually relate yet? So does alcohol use, or at what levels does alcohol use make future dementia more likely?
Well, I think what we know is that with prolonged heavy use and intake of alcohol, it begins to serve as a neurotoxin, just as it also has been identified as a cancer-inducing agent. It has really been identified as a neurotoxin, and that's how it is thought to mitigate its, or excuse me, be able to give its effects in terms of causing dementia and causing cognitive decline. I mean, cell death actually occurs in the brain because of the effects of high dose alcohol. So.
Yeah. So to clarify, like levels, like you sent us some info on this, and some of the early studies of this showed what they called a horseshoe effect. That if you drank absolutely no alcohol, or if you drank a lot of alcohol, your likelihood of dementia was increased. But then they were like, okay, the reason why no alcohol seemed to create a higher one is because post-alcoholics are no alcohol. So some people who drank for 30 years and then they joined AA and they don't drink anything, then they got into this study and they're the zero alcohol people, but they still developed dementia later because of the damage that was already done. Yes. And so they're like, drinking no alcohol does not make you more likely to get dementia, right? However, there also doesn't seem to be an effect for like very small amounts of alcohol either. And one of the things that we looked at was for all health negatives, a small amount of alcohol, especially when combined with a healthier lifestyle, which especially includes exercise, particularly cardiovascular exercise, shows no variance in like worse health outcomes. Yes. But you start getting into like 3 drinks a night, like 10 drinks a week, you start like where alcohol becomes like reflexive. I just drink it. I just have wine every night. That gets you into a trajectory that could likely have negative health outcomes.
Yes.
Right. Aside from all the money you're spending.
Aside from all that, yes. And that's deceptive. And I've seen it in my practice, and frankly, missed it, a couple of times, and then had to come back and realize that no, this patient does not have Alzheimer's disease. They have alcohol-induced dementia, and they, because of the fact that both the patient themselves and family members were hiding it and minimizing the use of alcohol. And it also became clear that the medications that are used to try to slow cognitive decline in Alzheimer's in these patients of mine did not work at all. And so that became also a diagnostic factor that said something else is going on here.
Yeah. The info you sent us to also stated that this is especially true if there's been drinking or heavy alcohol use in middle age. So like as some people are tempted to become like wine mommies, or as men get more pressure because they have 2 or 3 children and they're just like feeling more pressure, people are looking for a release. Alcohol is an easy, accessible one. But drinking a bunch in middle age, this is one of the ways it can catch up with you. You need to be careful about it.
And that's why, too, we also say that after over age 65, moderation, including either abstaining or no more than 1 drink per day, in order to not facilitate or make any cognitive decline that inevitably might occur in older age. Is a good reason not to be drinking as much.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm going to just kind of throw this out there. Like, this is something people understood in the ancient world. Marius, one of these great dictators in Rome, he's 70 and he's, in a civil war. And so he's really stressed. And so he's drinking heavily and he like essentially drinks himself to death. And Plutarch's like, dude, when you're 70, you can't drink like that. Like, what are you thinking? Like, everybody knows this. You got to be moderate. But he couldn't sleep. So he was just getting drunk every night and going to bed. But
it's interesting that observation, just basically by perceptive observation, you figured some of those things out.
Yeah, so I'm 48 now, about to turn 49, and a number of the people in my life are like, I can't drink any alcohol anymore. I used to be able to have a couple of drinks, and I just realized my body just doesn't like it anymore. And some of them are women, fewer are men, but you begin to see this where people are like, this used to be fun, or like, but now even like 1 or 2 drinks, and my digestion is off, like my mind is off, my body doesn't like this, and this is one of those deals where it's just like you should listen to your body.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of things. Like I was talking to my brother-in-law, and he stopped eating sugar, and he's just like lost like 25 pounds, like all muscle. And he's about that age too, and there's a lot of things within our diet that are just incredibly unnatural, unhealthy. I will never forgive John Sekatowski for saying that ice cream is the food that seems to be the most designed to be bad for your health. Like basically everything in it is terrible for you. And I'm just like, I hate you so much. I don't believe it. I refuse to accept that reality.
It's a hard tension because physical health isn't everything either. But you don't want to destroy your body on purpose. So it's a tension to hold.
Yeah, it's a stewardship question.
Yeah, it's a stewardship question.
As long as I'm in the body, I want to be able to serve God.
Yep.
And so my body has to be capable of doing it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump on the next one. This is just a straight medical question. So Bill, this is for you. If you are taking blood pressure medication, should there be absolutely no alcohol consumption, or is a drink on occasion okay? Example, 1 drink per month.
That is well within normal use of alcohol while taking blood pressure medication. Okay. Yes, there's not a problem with that. Yes, some blood pressure medications will interact, or are actually cardiac medications, particularly also anticoagulants, blood thinners, if you will also have a sort of augmented effect when drinking alcohol on a regular basis. So maybe making a person more susceptible to a bleed of some type, arrhythmias of the heart. But that once a month and very controlled amounts of alcohol should not significantly affect someone who's on blood pressure medication. The big one that I found was that a lot of guys, go to a athletic club and they work out, they're on blood pressure medicine, go have a couple of drinks and then jump in the sauna or the hot tub, get up and pass out.
Yeah.
And, bro, what were you thinking? You weren't thinking, okay? I've told you, you can't do that. You're on blood pressure medication.
Yeah.
It vasodilates, everything, and you just pass out.
Yeah.
And so, yes, so that's a place where that has no place. If you're going to get in the sauna, don't drink before you get in a sauna. But that's
full stop.
Yeah.
Don't drink and get in the sauna.
Yeah, I just don't do that.
Look at all the free advice people get. This is
we should have a Dr. Bill podcast.
All right, next question. Is CBD, what is colloquially called medical marijuana, is THC ever used for medical purposes?
Well, the answer is yes. THC is used for medical purposes, and it is not legal to use THC for medical purposes in Wisconsin, but for instance, Florida.
So explain this to me, because I can drive around Madison. I've been thinking about this, and there's like all these weed shops that are openly selling THC products. So how? What's the law at? I mean, I know I should know the law here.
No, it's you're the lawyer.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it.
Because
it looks like it's legal in Madison. I mean, it's like,
but it isn't, you know.
Dank of America on Williamson Street.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I mean, I got to give him credit for creativity.
Yeah.
Well, I do too. But in terms of medical marijuana, first of all, for instance, the state of Florida, if a doctor prescribes it for you for what are considered medically indicated purposes, so if a person has Parkinson's disease, a terminal cancer, those types of things, then you can obtain medical marijuana, but you can only get it from a dispensary that is licensed to give medical marijuana. But yet in the state of Florida, recreational marijuana is illegal.
Interesting. Okay.
And what's being prescribed medically there is not FDA approved. There's no FDA approval for that.
Yes, I've met women who got a THC prescription for their menstrual cramps.
In Wisconsin or in
the person
Florida?
I'm thinking of is in New York.
New York. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
And is not a family member.
Okay.
Just to be clear, since I have family members.
Okay.
So off-label use, you know, very much, whether it's either prescribed or used, gotten illegally.
Yeah.
So there aren't FDA approved THC
there are not.
medical uses.
Yeah, there are not.
Do you think that I've heard some people say that smoking marijuana when they were receiving chemotherapy was very helpful for nausea?
Yeah, that is an observation that has been made.
Yeah, and appetite stimulation, right?
And appetite stimulation.
Yeah,
yes.
That's been observed a lot around here. Yeah. All right, let's move on.
Well, just to quickly clarify, though, CBD, I think in your question they were talking about CBD as medical marijuana. CBD is not marijuana. It's something extracted from the whatever cannabis plant. It doesn't have there's no THC. It doesn't have a whatever psychedelic effect or intoxicating effect. Yeah, it's you can. I mean, I tried CBD and it was just like, again, that's why I think it's a placebo. I didn't feel anything from it.
There may be a very small amount of THC, and if you're under a certain amount legally in Wisconsin, you can grow the hemp, plant and be able to market it. There is one preparation, Epidiolex, I believe, is the brand name of it, of a CBD derivative that is FDA approved for refractory seizure treatment.
That's right, yeah.
In certain types of seizure-prone brain disorders.
Okay. This one you can jump on first here, Monty. In our paper, this is in reference to the paper, I think. Shouldn't cultural assumptions be last under discernment questions? It's good to know where culture is heading, but it shouldn't be our decision factor. So in the paper we wrote, cultural assumptions was a pretty early section. Or here are the cultural assumptions around this. And this person's saying, shouldn't cultural assumptions be kind of like the last thing we're worried about? Why have them that early in the...
I have a really short answer. I think it's just about framing, right? You need to understand the lens that you're looking at something through before you can talk about it, right? A person that, if we were writing this paper 100 years ago, we would talk about stuff completely differently. Even though the conclusions would be the same, we'd be coming at it from a different angle. Yeah,
if I try to discern something about Jill's performance at work and I subconsciously hate Jill's guts, becoming aware that I subconsciously hate Jill's guts will be helpful in trying to accurately discern how she's doing at work, right? Yeah. So similarly, like we need to bring them to the top because we need to be aware of them at the very beginning.
Everyone has assumptions.
And then work our way through.
So I think like if you think you're just neutral kind of going into this, you are impacted one way or the other by the cultural assumptions. So you need to know what they are.
Yeah. And this is true both in terms of worldly cultural assumptions and also protective or legalistic assumptions. Yeah. Both of those affect how we look at these things. And I've seen that in the church. I've seen some people be like, oh, who cares? It's no big deal. Like, whatever. You're making such a big deal about this. And then other people are like, alcohol is literally the syrup of Satan. Yeah. And if it touches your lips, they're just very reactive.
Those are cultural assumptions. Yeah.
Strong. And some of those cultural assumptions come from for very good reasons.
Right.
Yeah. Like most of the people who have been very, very against having wine and communion are either A, they were alcoholics. B, they are ministering directly with alcoholics. Or C, they are from a cultural context in which alcoholic wreaked havoc in people's lives and communion is extremely sacred to them. And to them, they cannot mentally put those two things in association with each other. Yeah. And most of those people are also over 75 years old. So they have a long personal history with those things. And I'm very sympathetic to those views. However, I do think those are assumptions, cultural assumptions. that we're bringing to Scripture and
Yeah.
church history and sacraments and what we're doing.
Yep. I mean, that's why I liked when we started our whole series. Jill asked a couple questions like, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? You know, how does this make you feel? And I mean, it's funny for me, honestly, like it's 100% negative, like really strongly within me. It's like, this is bad. It shouldn't be used. Like, you know, because of stuff from when I was young, but it's like, I can actually, you can work through those assumptions and come to biblical conclusions. And
yeah. Mine are all really negative too.
Mine are too. Yeah. I think, but knowing that the cultural assumptions aren't necessarily correct. So like, you know, the question kind of says like, it's good to know we're culture heads, but we're not saying that it's correct, but it also isn't necessarily incorrect.
Right.
It's just what we've kind of picked up. And so you need to know that in order to use discernment.
Yeah, I was surprised when I went back to Scripture, because like we were talking about stuff, I was like, okay, I need to go back to Scripture. I need to read every verse in the Bible that refers to this. I need to go through it. I was actually kind of surprised at how positive the view of alcohol was in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And in the New Testament.
Yeah.
That it was treated as a wholesome commodity, a blessing from God, used in worship. It's like every category, it was positive. And I was like,
what are we going to do now?
I remember thinking like, oh, but like, wait, if wine is a commodity of communion, like, kind of no duh, like, but I remember it just being like, after I was going through, I was like, well, maybe it's just wine, maybe like no other fermented drink. And then God's like, hey, for your tithe, buy whatever you want, wine or any fermented drink, and it'll be great. It's just like, oh, and this is a holy festival, a holy convocation of the Lord is to be celebrated. Right. And I remember doing the math on how much wine Jesus made. I know people treat that as kind of like a cliche, like the lushes of the church want to say that Jesus made 100 gallons of wine, but he literally did make over 100 gallons of wine.
It's incredible.
And that's hundreds of 750 milliliter bottles of wine, right? To a group of people that the master of the ceremony said were already relatively intoxicated. And you're like, well, what? And it's just like, after a while, you're like, wait, how does that go in context to like what God says about drunkenness? And then as you read through all the passages about drunkenness, it says drunkenness in and of itself is an evil in virtually all contexts.
Isn't or
but
is?
Is.
Okay, that's okay. Just to clarify.
But when you start reading through its emphasis, the focus of the emphasis is among worthless people and habitually. That it's bad in and of itself on some level just to be drunk, period. Full stop. But being drunk at a bar with a bunch of ne'er-do-wells and being somewhat drunk at a wedding with people wholesomely celebrating a community event
like once
isn't really the same thing.
So different. Yeah.
It's not really the same thing. And so Jesus can like provide all this wine at a wedding as a community, family, intergenerational event that's being overseen by a banquet, like all that stuff. And that's not the same thing as a guy getting drunk at the pub with the people, like, or it happening 3 times a week. Or repetitively. And the repetition of drunkenness, and that the main lie of it is you'll do it again, and you'll do it again, and you'll do it again. And you see this with college students. They don't get drunk one time. It becomes there's a whole semester, 4 nights a week. It eats on itself, and then it adds into it licentiousness and sexual sin and all these kinds of things. And so as I had to read all this, I just thought like, look, if you have more than 3 drinks, you're sinning. And then I'm like, okay, wait a second. Wait, this is what drunkenness is. This is the context. This is the context of the people. So there's a context of environment. There's also a context of habit, and those things come together to destroy lives. Yeah, and that's how Satan does it. And yet, if you were to have 5 glasses of wine at a wedding, that may not even be a sin. That may just be you really celebrating and like trying to get nuanced like that in terms of what the Bible actually says. If you look at all of the passages together. I realized that because I thought I was like progressive on this. I thought like, oh, there's lots of people like the old school Baptists, and they're never going to be happy about wine, but like, I'm open-minded. We have wine every once in a while at dinner. And I realized that like I had a way more negative view of alcohol than the Bible.
In the Scripture, yeah.
And that was really jarring to me. I did not expect to experience that.
Yeah.
But I'm still real careful. About what I prescribe for the church.
Right.
Yeah.
Where are you going to go?
Well, I was just going to say, I might, be taking us off course so you can jump back in, but we recently got a letter from somebody, and I'm going to ask a question from it towards you, Nick. But they, and I've heard this argument before. This is what I heard when I was young, is that actually when the Old Testament is talking about wine, they're talking about grape juice, and we mistranslate grape juice as their word for grape juice is wine. Or actually, more specifically, that Hebrews didn't distinguish between grape juice and wine, and that we should actually be reading these references to wine as like unfermented grape juice.
Yeah, that's a old fundamentalist argument from the early 20th century that's completely false.
Yeah.
And you should know it's false, and here's why.
Well, I do, but I mean, I believe it's false, but I don't understand.
So you can know it's false just reading the English Bible. Now, it is true. So, like, okay, maybe they wouldn't know this, but like the Hebrew word for what is sometimes translated new wine is different from just like wine. And then there are references to what's sometimes called mixed wine, right? And so new wine is this year's vintage. And it is still fermenting, and it has a lower alcohol content, almost certainly than most other wines. And so and it's sweeter. It tastes a little bit like if you ever had that like Concord wine that is like at Jewish Seders, that's like very sweet. That's made from Concord grapes. It's probably a little bit more like that. Okay. So it is true where the Bible explicitly says new wine. It's less alcoholic, more sweet, this year's vintage. And that's true. That's the vast minority of cases in which wine is referenced. Also, the references to wine making people drunk are like pretty clear in Scripture, right? Like you can't argue that the wine isn't alcoholic and that wine makes people drunk. When clearly in the Bible the wine makes people drunk, right? And this is true of wine. It's true of mixed wine. And then the Bible also says that even in religious convocation festivals unto the Lord, you're free to buy any fermented drink. Now it is true that the real use of stills to make distilled liquors doesn't come till much later. So distilled liquors are almost unheard of in the ancient world, and therefore in the world of the Bible. So what we think of as cocktails or whiskeys, that kind of thing, they're virtually unheard of. The Muslims invented fermenting of drinks, which is kind of ironic because they're not supposed to have any alcohol. But they invented that ferment, and then it wasn't until like the 1700s that we had the like metallurgy to make really huge brass stills, and then it wasn't until the 1800s until there was like the gin revolution, right? So distilled liquor is its own animal, right? And I think we should have a pretty negative view in some ways of distilled liquors, and Christians have historically had a pretty negative view of distilled liquors, but not of beers, wines, and fermented drinks of that kind, meads. That sort of thing.
Due to their lower alcohol by volume, concentration.
Much lower.
Much lower. Yeah.
I have some friends from Ukraine that moved here when the war broke out, and that was the thing that surprised them was that when they went over to Christian's house, some of them had like hard liquor. They're like, we drink wine and beer, but like, I can't believe Christians drink like liquor here. Yeah, that they were really surprised. Like that's unheard of. In their circles,
that distinction is just like totally unknown. And like as a pastor, I'd be really fine with that distinction. Like I'd be like, that makes sense that because like wine is explicitly affirmed, and these distilled liquor isn't in the Bible. Distilled liquor is made to concentrate the liquor and make it more alcoholic, and the fruit of distilled liquor in human societies has been mostly negative.
Yes,
and if there's some benefit that comes from drinking alcohol, then you get this like, well, why do you need that argument, right? You could be like, okay, what do you get from having gin that you don't get from a glass of wine?
Yeah,
right, are things still getting better as the alcohol percentage increases? And I would be okay with that. I don't think we should forbid distilled liquors. I don't think it's like intentionally like unbiblical, but I think that the dangers are higher. The health benefits aren't there. Like there's a bunch of things. It sneaks up on you faster.
Yeah.
It's in the presence where kids can access it. There's lots of those kind of dynamics that come in with distilled liquors that don't exist as much with beers or wines.
Yeah, just to kind of come back around to cultural assumptions, because we were talking, what we're talking about are cultural assumptions. But when you don't know what your cultural assumptions are, it's hard to hold nuance because like you just read everything through that lens. So that's why it's really important to know what they are. Because like for me, I grew up Baptist, pretty Baptist, so it was not denominational, but we were really Baptist. And yet there was like high alcohol consumption in my family of origin. And so, there's all these different conflicting things. And I had to know that all of that affects how I feel and then look at the scriptures and there's both and in there, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah. And one of the sad things about this as a pastor of leading a public church is on one level, if my church was just the 75-year-olds that object, I'd be like, hey, listen, let's just not have any wine and communion and let's just cruising altitude at this till everybody passes. I mean, this is fine. Like we're not being hurt by the fact that we're not drinking alcohol, I don't think. There's nowhere in the Bible that says you have to drink alcohol, right? But the problem is we have a multi-generational church of people from different countries, different eras, and so there's a very different experiences here. Like when we had one of these, Inga, who's from Germany, was like, you guys got to know that like this is a totally American conversation. Like in Germany, nobody would.
Nobody's ever thought of it. They haven't even thought to
consider the idea, right? Right. And yet it's not that far to Romania,
Right.
where a lot of Christians there are completely scandalized by the use of alcohol. So we have a German Christian who's like, this is kind of silly. And then we have a Romanian Christian who are like, this is the biggest issue I've ever faced at this church. I can't believe this is happening. And you're like, and both of these are really like God-fearing, Bible-knowing, Spirit-filled believers. And you're just, as a pastor, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh. And this is why, since my sabbatical, I've said, look, we have to have a theological identity as a church. And I've said, what I'm aiming at is classical Protestant evangelicalism. Because we have to have an identity. What is our authority? Like, what is our common foundation? And what counts as data for our arguments about what should be accepted? And my argument is that we have to go to, if we all say that we believe the Bible's God's word. And so we have to be able to go back to the Bible and we have to get past these assumptions. We have to say, like, what does this book really say? And then apply it with diligence in our time. And that's what I tried to do on this issue. And I did not think it was going to make me more positive towards alcohol when I did that. But in fact, in studying it, I found that inescapable. And so it made me more conservative on a few things and clarified a few things, like how the Bible does not say anybody has to consume it, even though it's a good commodity. Paul also affirms Timothy not drinking any alcohol until there's a particular medicinal help that it could create for him. And so there's lots of room for conscience there, if that makes sense. So I feel like in order for us to sort through this as we have a diverse church, we've got to have a foundation, and we've got to build on that foundation with appropriate nuance. And figuring out what our assumptions are, whether they're the assumptions of we shouldn't touch the syrup of Satan, or whether it's hey, what's the big deal? There's no big deal here. This is just like some stupid fundamentalist thing. Neither of those are true, not according to Scripture. And if we want to say that we are Scripture oriented, one of the letters I got that told me that I was doing this wrong was like, we just need to read our Bibles. And I'm like, you're not listening. This whole thing was about reading the Bible and praying and trying to get closer to the Bible and what Scripture really teaches. But people get in their minds that what they've always done is what the Bible teaches because their church was a Bible church. And they don't realize that, man, things in every tradition, things sneak in. Yeah. That's why part of being classically Protestant evangelical is to be reformed and always reforming. We think we're doing it right, but we have to always be reforming, which is the opposite of our tradition is always right.
What that means is personal discernment too. Like you have to, you can hear what we're saying and you can't, like, you might feel conviction about it. You might feel all sorts of ways about it. Look at the Scriptures. You have to discern what you're going to do practically in your life to be obedient to Christ, right? And so I think it's easy to like look at what people say and get upset if it's different than what we think, and really just use it to discern what you should do. Like, it's your conscience. And so that's really what the Scripture is aiming at. And that's why there's so much nuance, because it could be different in some ways for everyone. There are these lines, but then there's so much freedom in between. Yeah.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left. Let's just knock out a couple of these. Okay. One is, in the alcohol case study, Bill said some stuff about younger people getting access to alcohol, and the person's like, why should we care about that relative to the general larger moral principles of applying access to alcohol? My opinion is it's a both thing. Yeah. Well, unless you assume based on moral principles, none of us would have any alcohol in our house ever. If you start with that, then obviously kids aren't going to have access to it because there's no alcohol in the house. But if you recognize that there is the possibility of utilizing alcohol and having it, then the access of it's kind of like owning a gun. If you decide you want to have a gun for some reason, then who can access it becomes an additional moral question.
Yep. I think when Bill responded, my understanding, because in the case study it said that the reason this man one of the reasons he drank regularly was to set an example for his children of moderation. And so that's kind of, I think, at least why in my mind we were focused on that, because it's like, if that's the reason, is that actually the way to achieve that goal? And is that an accurate reason to have, a reasonable reason to have? So I think it was also particular to the case study, but I do think it is either or. Like, there's lots of reasons to consider why it makes sense. Or not.
And our behavior in many areas doesn't just affect us, it affects others. And we have to be aware of the fact that what we do We hear in our society a lot, well, if it doesn't hurt anybody else, then it's okay. Well, no, because I think there is a domino effect within our actions. And so the case in study that I brought up was calling the father of a friend of our girls who was hosting a party and had given no thought whatsoever to the alcohol that he had in his house or having any standard for use of alcohol by these 16, 17-year-olds. And my daughters weren't very happy with me when I said, you're not going. But I just do not think this is a good situation or a good setup. So
I think I said my first experience with alcohol was stuff out of my parents' liquor cabinet. I remember a girl in my youth group who was pretty depressed, and she really godly young woman. Her dad was a pastor, and she just confessed, I think it was her junior year, that she had been drinking a good bit of alcohol out of her parents' cabinets for the last 2.5 years. And I think parents also get really embarrassed about that, because to this day, when the first time I used alcohol, I had some friends over to my house after a play. It was like a cast party, and we drank a whole bottle of vodka and about a third of a bottle of another liquor of a similar kind. And in my teenage brain, I didn't think, well, my dad will know this is gone. There were only 4 bottles of liquor in there, right? It wasn't like there were 100 bottles, And to this day, my parents never mentioned it to me. They never confronted me about it, because I think my dad must have realized it, and he must have just felt embarrassed and just not said anything. And for me, it didn't lead to a long experience, but that was what happened. I ended up accessing my parents' alcohol, and they were pretty discreet people. But that's still what happened, and it will happen with kids.
It will.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah. And if you have Wi-Fi and a computer, or your kids have smart devices, they have access to stuff maybe 1,000 times worse than alcohol.
That
is
watch your kids, parent them.
Yep.
Okay. One of the questions is, will there be future discussions about antidepressants and anxiety medications, since culturally these are trending upward in prescriptions? The answer is yes. We have that coming. I don't know if we know the date.
I think it's we said originally July 12th, but you're actually going to be on vacation.
I'm going to be gone.
So I think it's in later July or
I thought August 19th was the most recent date.
Okay, August 19th. Great.
Yeah.
Great. That's when it is.
Yeah. Great.
And I want to say something about this. We don't hate all medications. I just want to say that we're not automatically against this. If you're I don't want to come to that. But we will be critical in the sense of critically thinking about, what does this actually do?
Yeah. What
is actually studied? What is actually spoken about or hidden? So we will do that.
Yeah. And we should expect that because the medical industry, so to speak, or our culture doesn't want to give spiritual answers to things, that they're never going to give the whole answer to a lot of human problems, which means by definition, they're going to be looking for a shortcut and a quick fix, even if that is relatively substantial. And so they will overuse all the other things at their disposal, including medications.
Yeah, humans can misuse anything.
Yeah, but we're trying to do some good research on it to make sure that medically and scientifically the stuff we're saying is correct, but also with a clear spiritual mindset towards it. And we're not going to take don't ever take an SSRI or these really are the answer. It's neither of those things. And we're going to give you a paradigm how to look at it, which is a drug model rather than medication model, which I think will be helpful. So we'll be doing that in August after I go fishing in Alaska and do some other fun stuff with my family.
Explore the world.
All right, I think that's all the time we've got for today, even though we've got some more questions on wine and communion, which seem to keep coming in. But anyway, we hopefully this stuff was helpful for you. Hopefully this series has been helpful. A lot of these that parts of the essay and the paper we did are going up on our Substack, which is it nick.gibson.substack? But if you look for substance on Substack, I think it's nick.gibson.
No, it's nickgibson.substack.com.
Nick Gibson, N-I-C, no K, nicgibson.substack.com. And it's also the Substance Substack. And now you can look at that. And one of the subsections on that is Intoxicating Substances. And we're kind of breaking out the paper piece by piece so that all that information is going up. I'd encourage you to subscribe. There's lots of good stuff on there. Some of Monty's posts are some of the highest viewed posts in the whole history of the Substack. So that's exciting.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thanks for all the research you did on this project. And hopefully this will be really helpful for people. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.